Here on our channel, people's stories come to life. Stories from different eras, professions, and destinies. Each of them follows their own path, their own life woven from circumstances, challenges, and choices. Before we step into their world, make sure to subscribe, and later, share your impressions in the comments. Now, let's begin. Some stories don't start with loud events. They start small, with details, with moments that seem insignificant, yet hold entire worlds within them. These are stories about people who never chose to be heroes. They simply lived, worked, made mistakes, learned from them, and kept moving forward. The lives of such people unfold like a slowly blooming flower, each petal revealing itself in its own time, each layer hiding new secrets, new pains, new joys. This is a story from a time when the world was just a little different. The city wakes before dawn, and so does the boy. This is the year when gas lamps still flicker along the Parisian streets, when the sound of wooden wheels on cobblestone announces the arrival of carts laden with vegetables and kindling. Armand is 8 years old, perhaps 9. Such things are not precisely tracked in households like his, and he moves through the narrow rooms of his mother's apartment with the careful quietness of someone who has learned that silence costs nothing and often saves money. The apartment sits above a print shop in the Marais, in a building so old that the floorboards speak in their own language, creaking confessions to anyone patient enough to listen. His mother, Celeste, works as a seamstress when her hands permit it. Today they do not. She sits by the window, her fingers resting motionless on her lap, watching the street below with the expression of someone cataloging losses. The illness came gradually, the kind that announces itself through small failures. A needle dropped, a shirt left unfinished, a morning when she cannot rise. Armand has already learned to read the signs in her face, to know which days will require him to be smaller, quieter, more useful. He brings her water. He empties the chamber pot. He does these things without being asked, understanding through some instinct older than instruction that his compliance is a form of love. The print shop below belongs to a man named Monsieur Girard, a printer of circulars, notices, and small newspapers. The shop is Armand's real education, though no one calls it that. One morning, Monsieur Girard finds him sitting on the threshold, watching the light move across the compositor's bench, and instead of shouting him away, as might be expected, he asks if the boy wants to learn. Armand nods. He has already decided that he wants to learn everything the print shop knows. The work begins simply. Armand cleans. He sweeps the thin shavings of lead and paper that accumulate like the detritus of language itself. He arranges sorts in the typecases, learning the mysterious geography of letters arranged in wooden compartments. Each sort has its place. Each place has its logic. The lowercase letters occupy the lowercase, a practical arrangement that teaches him something about how the world organizes itself. Capital letters live above, literally elevated, reserved for important words and the start of sentences. There is democracy in type and also strict hierarchy, and Armand absorbs both lessons simultaneously, without ever thinking about them as lessons. Monsieur Girard is not a gentleman, but he is consistent. He strikes Armand once for dropping a tray of small caps, and after that, Armand never drops anything. The fear is efficient. More importantly, Girard teaches through demonstration rather than explanation. He shows how the compositor must read backward, must think in reverse, must see the final image before it exists. This requires a specific kind of mind, one that can hold two contradictory versions of reality simultaneously. Armand discovers he possesses such a mind. He begins to understand that his way of seeing the world, which sometimes makes his mother speak of him as odd, is actually useful here. His precision is not merely acceptable, it is valued. The print shop smells of ink and lead and something metallic that Armand will later recognize as the smell of possibility. The ink comes in blocks that must be worked onto rollers with a specific motion. Too much enthusiasm and it accumulates unevenly. Too little and the impression will be pale. Armand practices this motion until his small arms ache. The press itself is a massive machine, a creature of iron and wood that must be fed paper with exact timing, that must be coaxed and respected, and never, under any circumstance, allowed to catch fabric or fingers. 3 apprentices have lost fingers to the press over the years. Monsieur Girard mentions this not as a warning, but as fact, the way one might note that fire burns or water is wet. The newspapers that pass through the shop are strange things to a boy who has never learned to read fluently. The text is printed in columns, interrupted by advertisements for remedies that promise to cure unnamed afflictions, for patent medicines in bottles with mysterious labels. But the words themselves, even when Armand cannot decipher them completely, carry weight. They describe things happening in the world beyond the Marais, beyond Paris itself. There are articles about strikes in the provinces, about political conflicts he cannot understand, about crimes and scandals and the movements of important men. By handling these papers repeatedly, by setting the type that creates these words, Armand absorbs a sense that language is power, and that printers are, in some indirect way, dealers in power. One afternoon, while sorting type, he finds a circular printed years earlier, yellowed and worn. It describes a meeting of workers, a gathering in a factory, a call for something called solidarity. Monsieur Girard had printed it, probably paid very little for the work, and it had gone out into the world to accomplish whatever it was meant to accomplish. Armand holds it carefully, suddenly aware that his hands have touched something that mattered, that passed through his employer's press and emerged as an object capable of changing the way people thought. The realization is quiet, but profound. He folds the circular carefully and keeps it, the first of what will become a lifelong habit of collecting. His mother dies when he is 13. It happens in the evening, after a day that seemed no worse than other days. Armand sits beside her as her breathing slows, as the light fades from the room and from her eyes simultaneously. He does not cry, or rather, he does not allow himself to. Instead, he makes a decision with the practicality of someone far older than his years. He will live in the print shop. He will make himself invaluable. He will transform his loss into precision, his grief into work. Monsieur Girard, presented with this sudden situation, agrees to take Armand as a formal apprentice. The arrangement is convenient for both of them. Armand requires housing and feeding. Monsieur Girard requires a young person willing to work for minimal wages and the promise of learning a trade. The boy is already trained in the basics, reliable, and emotionally unremarkable. He does not make trouble or complaint. The apartment above the shop is closed up. Armand's mother's meager possessions are sold or given away. The life before the print shop becomes something almost dreamlike, too painful to examine directly. He sleeps now in a small room behind the shop, among the stored paper and the smell of dried ink. At night, he can hear the press creaking as the old building settles, a sound that becomes comforting through familiarity. He wakes early, works steadily through the day, and reads by candlelight in the evenings. His reading improves dramatically because he is now reading the very words he has set in type, understanding their meaning through context and repetition. He teaches himself geography through newspapers describing distant cities. He learns about politics through circulars and notices. He becomes, through the accident of his circumstances, educated in the practical knowledge of his era, not through schooling, but through immersion. Around this time, another apprentice arrives at the shop, a young man named Claude Mercier, who is perhaps 17 to Armand's 13. Claude is the son of a minor official, placed in the shop as punishment for some unspecified failure or scandal. He is quick-witted, prone to jokes that make the other apprentices laugh, possessed of an ease that Armand recognizes as something he will never naturally possess. Yet Claude takes an interest in the younger boy. He shows him shortcuts, teaches him the names of things in the language of experienced printers, includes him in conversations. Within weeks, they have formed the kind of friendship that transforms childhood, not dramatic, but fundamental. A recognition between two people that something about the other feels true. The commune has faded by now into history, though its ghosts still walk the streets. Armand is too young to have direct memory of it, but the print shop has preserved certain documents, certain notices, certain evidence of what people once tried to build. Monsieur Girard speaks of it rarely, always with a mixture of contempt and something else. Perhaps respect, though he would never admit it. The newspapers arriving at the shop now are controlled in ways Armand gradually recognizes without having language for the recognition. Certain stories are printed, others are omitted. Certain opinions are permitted, others are dangerous. He begins to understand that the press is not a neutral instrument, but an extension of power, and that even in his small role as compositor, he participates in this arrangement. By the time he is 15, Armand is no longer quite a boy. He is a skilled apprentice, moving rapidly toward the status of journeyman. His hands know their work so completely that his mind can wander even as his fingers perform their precision. He has read thousands of words, setting them in type, and in doing so has accumulated a strange education that no school could provide. He knows the city's secrets as they are printed and distributed. He understands, in an intuitive way, that language shapes reality, and that those who control language shape the world. He remains cautious around authority, a learned response, but he has discovered in the print shop a refuge, a structure, a place where his oddness becomes utility. The shop continues its work day after day, the same mechanical rhythms that will define the rest of his life. The press turns, the paper feeds through, the ink transfers its impression, and the words emerge, black on white, permanent and reproducible. Armand's hands move through their patterns, and he does not yet know that this skill, this precision, this ability to see what others miss, will eventually lead him toward a mystery he never sought, a mystery that will transform everything he understands about the power he wields simply by setting type in the dark shop below the Parisian streets. 19 years old, and Armand Tessier has already internalized the rhythms of labor so completely that he moves through the world as though choreographed by invisible hands. The print shop near the Place de la Bastille is larger than Monsieur Gérard's old establishment in the Marais. A genuine operation with 6 compositors, 2 pressmen, a manager, and a boy who sweeps. Armand arrived here 3 years ago, following Claude, who had leveraged his family connections into a supervisory position that seemed, at the time, like the beginning of something promising. The irony of this arrangement, though Armand could not have articulated it then, is that friendship and ambition move at different speeds, and hierarchy, once introduced, has a way of quietly poisoning the space where equality once lived. The work itself has become something deeper than mere technical skill. Armand's hands perform their movements with such automaticity that his mind exists in a kind of double consciousness, simultaneously focused on the immediate task and wandering through the larger landscape of meaning. He can set type at a speed that impresses even the experienced men, and his error rate approaches invisibility. This reputation for precision has earned him small privileges. He is entrusted with important work, with newspapers of significance, with documents that require absolute accuracy. He takes pride in this, though pride is a luxury he allows himself only in private moments, usually late at night when the shop is empty, and he can stand alone among the sorted types, aware of his own competence without needing to announce it. Paris in these years is transforming itself. The city is electric with ambition and anxiety. New buildings rise beside old ones. Railways extend outward. Gas lamps give way gradually to electric lights that turn night into something almost indistinguishable from day. The newspapers passing through the shop reflect this transformation obsessively. There are articles about progress, about the future, about innovation and industry. There are also articles about strikes, about workers organizing in factories, about the fear that settles into the hearts of those who own things when those who own nothing begin to recognize their own power. Armand reads all of it, absorbs all of it, and begins, slowly, almost against his will, to develop opinions about the world. The relationship with Claude has shifted in ways that pain him, though he does not often acknowledge this pain directly. Claude is his supervisor now, responsible for assigning work and ensuring deadlines are met. In the presence of other men, Claude maintains a professional distance that feels like betrayal, though Claude would certainly deny it was ever his responsibility to maintain intimacy across the boundary of hierarchy. Yet in moments alone, usually during brief breaks taken behind the shop, Claude reverts to something closer to his old self, joking, confiding, seeming to apologize for the distance without using words. These contradictions confuse Armand. He has learned to be practical. But practicality does not easily accommodate the grief of friendship altered by circumstance. It is during one of these breaks that Claude mentions Marguerite. She is the sister of another compositor's wife, he explains. She works as a laundress in the neighborhood. She is, Claude seems to indicate with careful casualness, available, and not entirely uninteresting. Armand does not pursue this information immediately. He files it away, the way he files away so many observations about the world, turning it over occasionally in his mind as one might turn a key in a lock, trying to determine which door it opens. Eventually, inevitably, he goes to find her. Marguerite's laundry occupies a narrow space on a street where water runs perpetually in the gutters, carrying the debris of domestic life toward the drains. She is approximately Armand's age, perhaps a year or two younger, with the particular thinness that comes from physical labor and uncertain nutrition. She has dark eyes and the habit of wiping her hands on her apron repeatedly, even when they are already dry. When Claude introduces them formally at a cafe, an awkward arrangement that makes Armand's discomfort visible, Marguerite smiles without warmth, as though performing an expected social gesture. Yet, over the following weeks, something shifts. Armand begins to find reasons to pass the laundry. Marguerite begins to save him work, pressing his one good shirt with extra care, providing small courtesies that might mean nothing or might mean everything. The courtship, if it can be called that, is conducted in brief conversations during working hours, in careful walks through neighborhoods where they might encounter people who knew them. There is no drama in it, no grand declarations. Rather, it is a practical arrangement between two people who recognize in each other a similar weariness, a similar understanding that life is largely about endurance, punctuated by occasional moments of genuine connection. Armand proposes to her. If proposal is the right word for what amounts to a conversation about practical arrangements, housing, wages, the division of labor. Marguerite accepts, or perhaps agrees would be more accurate. They marry in a small ceremony at the church, attended by a handful of people from both their working lives. The marriage itself is a strange territory that Armand navigates poorly. He has learned precision in all things except the realm of human feeling. Marguerite is patient with him, up to a point. She works her long hours at the laundry. He works his long hours at the print shop. They share a small apartment, 2 rooms and a kitchen barely large enough for one person to occupy, in a building that smells perpetually of cabbage and human presence. They share a bed, but sharing space and sharing intimacy are not the same thing, and the distance between these two facts becomes, over time, impossible to ignore. Marguerite wants children, or she says she wants them, though Armand suspects she wants the idea of children more than the reality. Armand cannot envision bringing a child into the world as it exists, uncertain, economically precarious, filled with dangers that seem to multiply yearly. Their arguments are quiet, and therefore somehow more devastating. Marguerite accuses him of coldness, of withdrawal, of an inability to engage with life as it is actually lived, rather than as it might theoretically be organized. Armand, in response, offers silence, which is perhaps the cruelest reply possible. He recognizes, with a part of himself that observes even his own failures, that he is repeating patterns learned from his mother, that he has learned to withdraw, to make himself smaller, to believe that his own needs are luxuries others cannot afford. Marguerite, increasingly frustrated, begins to spend time with other people, other men, in ways that hover just at the edge of infidelity without quite crossing it. Armand recognizes this too, but does not know how to stop it, or, if he is honest with himself, whether he wishes to. His real life during these years is the print shop. The work expands, becomes more various. He is assigned increasingly important newspapers, including one that has begun to develop a reputation for serious journalism. The editor is a man named Henri Duval, though Armand does not meet him in person for many months. Duval's name appears at the top of the paper, and his byline marks certain articles, investigations into municipal corruption, questions about police practices, stories that hint at matters not safely discussed in polite society. The articles are carefully written, never quite crossing the line into sedition, yet they seem to imply that the world is not as it appears, that systems of power are not as transparent as they present themselves. Working with Duval's newspaper becomes, for Armand, something approaching obsession. He reads the articles not once but multiple times, examining them both for meaning and for the technical aspects of their composition. The way certain words are positioned, the way headlines are constructed, the subtle choices about what facts to present and in what order. He begins to understand that journalism is not merely the reporting of facts, but the construction of narrative, and that the compositor, despite being invisible, participates in this construction. The spacing between words can emphasize or obscure meaning. The size of a headline can make an event seem important or trivial. His hands, setting type, are not neutral instruments, but actors in the creation of truth. This realization troubles him in ways he does not fully examine. He has been taught to follow instructions, to set the type exactly as it is written, to suppress any opinions he might hold about the content. Yet increasingly he finds himself aware of the gap between what is being presented and what might be true. He begins, very carefully, to make small alterations, nothing obvious, nothing that could be detected by a casual inspection, but modifications that seem to him to offer slight corrections to bias, small acts of rebellion that affirm his own judgment. A word positioned differently can change emphasis. Spacing, adjusted carefully, can shift meaning. These are minor acts, easily unnoticed, but they allow him to participate in the meaning-making rather than merely serving as its conduit. Claude notices nothing, or if he does, he says nothing. Yet the friendship between them has transformed into something more complicated. Claude has begun to move in slightly elevated circles, attending meetings with newspaper owners, discussing the business aspects of printing rather than the work itself. He has developed opinions about efficiency, about labor costs, about the necessity of keeping wages moderate to maintain competitive pricing. These opinions trouble Armand, though he recognizes that Claude is simply articulating what has always been true, that the print shop is not a refuge, but a business, and businesses are predicated on extracting maximum value from labor. The idealism Armand once felt about their friendship has soured into something more realistic and considerably sadder. In the 27th year of his life, Marguerite leaves. She does not announce this decision or explain it extensively. One evening, he returns to their apartment to find her few possessions gone, and a note on the table stating, with brutal simplicity, that she has gone to Lyon with someone she has met. There is no anger in the note, no accusations. It is written in a hand that shakes slightly, suggesting emotion. Yet the words themselves are matter-of-fact, almost professional. Armand reads it multiple times, as though repetition might alter its meaning. Eventually, he accepts it as simply one more failure added to the accounting of his life. The apartment becomes his true residence now, in a way it never was before. He lives there alone, a bachelor again, though no longer young enough to claim the identity comfortably. He makes his own meals, washes his own clothes, lives according to routines that require no negotiation with another person. There is peace in this solitude, but also a recognition that he has failed at something that appears to come naturally to others. He observes married couples in the street, in cafes, and cannot imagine how they manage the continuous accommodation that marriage requires. Yet he does not wish to be alone either, a contradiction he has learned to live with. His wages have increased modestly, and he is given better work, more responsibility. He is now, in all but title, a master compositor, the final authority on quality before pages are sent to press. It is a position of small power and considerable responsibility. Mistakes made at his level are not easily corrected and can result in entire editions being scrapped. He carries this weight without complaint, moving through his days with the same precision that has always defined him. Yet increasingly he finds himself aware of what his precision serves. The newspapers he sets in type are instruments of power, shaping opinion, constructing reality. And he, meticulous, careful Armand, is complicit in whatever these instruments accomplish. He begins to collect newspaper clippings with more deliberation now, creating a kind of archive of his era. He saves articles about strikes, alongside articles about police responses. He preserves obituaries of workers who died in accidents, alongside notices of industrial expansion. He collects Duvallet's investigations, marking them carefully, storing them in a box beneath his bed. He does not precisely articulate to himself what he is doing or why, but there is a sense that he is preserving evidence of something, creating a record that might matter someday. It is the work of someone aware that history is being created daily in the print shop, that his hands are part of that creation, and that someday someone might need to know what actually occurred, beneath the official narratives that circulate through the city's newspapers. The morning arrives ordinary and unremarkable, the kind of morning that reveals itself as significant only in retrospect. Armand is 32 years old now, wearing this age without particular comfort or grace, aware that he has crossed some invisible threshold into middle years without having accomplished anything that would justify the passage of time. The print shop continues its work as it always has, the press turning, the paper feeding through, the ink transferring its impressions onto blank surfaces that will soon be folded and distributed across Paris. He arrives early, as he always does, and begins his preparations for the day's work. A runner appears around midday with a commission from Henri Duval's newspaper. It is not unusual. Duval's publication has become one of their regular clients, but the request is more specific than usual. Duval has prepared a special edition, a comprehensive investigation into municipal corruption involving public contracts, police oversight, and the intersection of political power with private profit. The edition must be printed with absolute discretion, with particular attention to accuracy, with the understanding that certain people may wish to prevent its publication. Armand is requested by name, which in itself is notable. Duval apparently has been watching his work and trusts his precision. The pages arrive in the afternoon, delivered by Claude personally, which is unusual enough to catch Armand's attention. Claude seems nervous, which is unusual in itself. He sets the proofs on the work table with more care than the material strictly requires, and his hands move in small, uncertain gestures. When Armand asks if there is something amiss, Claude responds with forced casualness that everything is fine, merely sensitive, merely requiring the usual care with which they approach important work. Yet something in his manner suggests otherwise, a tension beneath the surface, a reluctance to maintain eye contact. Armand files this observation away, the first of many small details that will eventually accumulate into something larger. He begins setting the type that evening, working alone in the shop, the gas lamps casting everything in a pale, flickering light that makes the letters seem to float slightly on their metal bodies. As he reads through the text, necessarily reading it backward, the compositor's curse and skill, the content of the investigation begins to emerge in fragments. There are descriptions of contracts awarded to companies owned by relatives of municipal officials. There are accounts of police brutality against workers who protested these arrangements. There are names, dates, specific allegations. The investigation is thorough and carefully constructed, written in language that is precise enough to constitute evidence, but vague enough to avoid direct libel. Yet as Armand works through the text, he begins to notice peculiarities. Certain words are positioned with unusual spacing. In some places, the line breaks occur at points that seem unnatural, as though deliberate care has been taken to emphasize particular phrases or to create a visual effect beyond the normal requirements of typography. He slows his work, examining these anomalies more carefully. The spacing is minute, easily overlooked, but definitely intentional. Someone, presumably Duval, has embedded something within the text, some kind of message or cipher that exists in the negative space between words, in the gaps that normally mean nothing. Armand continues his work without altering anything, but his mind now moves in a different register. He is no longer merely setting type, but analyzing it, trying to determine what the pattern means. He completes the pages and locks them for printing, but he does not leave the shop immediately. Instead, he returns to the proofs and spends the remainder of the night reading and rereading the text, examining the unusual spacing, trying to determine if there is a code, a message, a hidden communication embedded within the ostensible content of the investigation. The edition is printed on schedule and distributed according to plan. It appears on the streets of Paris on a Tuesday morning, and the reaction is immediate, if not uniform. Some newspapers republish portions of it. Others dismiss it as speculation or attacks on respectable citizens. The police conduct a brief investigation into its sources, though with notable lack of urgency. Armand reads the various responses with his now familiar double consciousness, understanding both the surface meaning and the gaps beneath it. The special edition has accomplished its purpose, whatever that purpose precisely was, and life in the print shop continues as though nothing has changed. What changes instead is Armand's attention. For 3 days after the edition is published, he watches for Henri Duval at the newspaper office, making excuses to visit, hoping to speak with the man whose work he has come to recognize and respect. Duval does not appear. On the 4th day, Claude informs him, with a careful neutrality that does nothing to conceal underlying anxiety, that Duval has not been seen. He failed to attend meetings. He has not responded to messages. There is no explanation. By the 5th day, the police are discreetly asking questions about his whereabouts. By the 6th day, an official report suggests he may have gone away on business, traveling perhaps to the provinces, though no records exist of his travel arrangements. Armand does not consciously decide to investigate. Rather, investigation begins as a kind of obsession that gradually reveals itself to be necessary. He returns to his collection of Duval's articles, examining them with new attention. He notices patterns in the investigations, certain subjects that appear and disappear, certain allegations that surface and are then dropped, certain names that recur in connection with corruption in different forms. Duval had been building a case, not for a single article or edition, but across months or perhaps years, accumulating evidence of something systematic, something that ran deeper than individual corruption. A package arrives at the print shop on the 8th day after Duval's disappearance, addressed to Armand with no return address. It contains a single sheet of paper and nothing else, no letter, no explanation, merely a short sentence written in an unfamiliar hand. Trust the margins, not the words. The handwriting is shaky, as though written in haste or under duress, or by someone profoundly frightened. Armand recognizes immediately what this means. Duval has sent him a message, cryptic but clear. The code embedded in the spacing is not casual, but central. The real information exists in the gaps. He spends the following days and nights attempting to decode the hidden message. The work is frustrating because he lacks a precise system. He tries marking the unusual spacing, attempting to see if certain letters or words are emphasized. He tries counting letters or words between the spacing irregularities, seeking a pattern that would reveal how the code operates. He copies the entire text by hand, hoping that the physical act of reproduction might reveal something his eyes have missed. He works in his apartment, alone, creating papers covered in his own annotations and theories, aware that he is attempting something both absurd and necessary, trying to extract hidden meaning from objects that millions of people have read without noticing anything unusual. It is Claude who notices the obsession, though Claude does not know its specific focus. One afternoon at the shop, Claude finds him staring at a proof of the special edition, holding it at unusual angles, and asks, with the tone of someone who already knows the answer is complicated, what exactly he is doing. Armand cannot lie effectively, so he does not attempt it. He explains, carefully, that he believes Duval has hidden something in the text, that the unusual spacing is intentional, that there is a message worth discovering. Claude's face goes pale. He quickly suggests that Armand perhaps misunderstands the nature of typography, that spacing variations are common, that not everything requires explanation. Yet the nervousness in his manner suggests something else, a recognition that Armand is correct, and a fear of what this correctness might mean. Over the following weeks, Armand begins to move through Paris differently. He visits the newspaper office where Duval worked, observing the subtle changes in atmosphere. The investigation Duval had been conducting appears to have been abandoned. His desk has been cleared. Colleagues respond to questions about him with evasive politeness, as though he has become a subject that is not discussed. There is fear in this silence, Armand recognizes. Fear of speaking, fear of association, fear of the consequences that might follow acknowledging that Duval has disappeared under circumstances that require no official investigation. He visits the police prefecture, asking questions about Duval's whereabouts, presenting himself as merely a concerned citizen. The officers he speaks with are polite and utterly unhelpful. They suggest Duval has probably traveled. They note that men sometimes leave their employment without notification. They hint, almost imperceptibly, that asking too many questions about Duval might not be wise. The conversation takes on the texture of a threat, delivered through bureaucratic courtesy, and Armand recognizes that he has crossed from idle curiosity into territory where curiosity carries risk. Yet, having crossed that threshold, he cannot uncross it. He begins to investigate Duval's articles more systematically, attempting to understand what the journalist had been pursuing. He visits libraries and archives, reading through back editions of newspapers, trying to trace the connections between the various allegations. A pattern emerges, a network of officials and businessmen whose names appear repeatedly in different contexts, always in connection with arrangements that benefit them, always in ways that seem carefully constructed to avoid legal consequences. It is corruption, rendered almost elegant in its systematization, which is perhaps why it has continued so effectively. He also begins to listen more carefully to conversations in the print shop, to pay attention to what is discussed and what is carefully avoided. He notices that certain types of jobs are handled with more discretion than others. Advertisements that appear to have particular importance. Notices that seem to carry weight beyond their ostensible content. Documents that are printed in limited quantities and with explicit instructions regarding their distribution. The print shop, he realizes, is not merely an instrument of journalism, but an instrument of power in all its forms, including forms that are not publicized or acknowledged. It is during this period that Simone Mercier enters his life, though enters is perhaps too dramatic a word for what is initially a chance encounter. She is at the newspaper office when Armand visits to examine old editions, working as an assistant to one of the editors, and she approaches him with a directness that suggests she has observed him observing others. She is perhaps 10 years younger than he is, with sharp features and alert eyes, and she speaks with the confidence of someone educated beyond her apparent station. She asks, without preamble, what exactly he is investigating regarding Duval, noting that anyone asking the questions he has been asking must be investigating something. Armand's instinct is to be cautious, to deflect, to deny. Yet something in her manner, a recognition of shared concern perhaps, or simply the exhaustion of maintaining secrecy, leads him to speak more openly than he has spoken to anyone. He explains, in measured terms, his observations about the hidden code in Duval's final edition, his attempts to decode it, his growing awareness that Duval had been pursuing something significant. Simone listens without interruption, and when he finishes, she nods with the expression of someone whose suspicions have been confirmed. She tells him that she, too, has been paying attention. She, too, has noticed that Duval was pursuing something dangerous. She, too, has been trying to determine what happened to him and why the official response to his disappearance has been so notably indifferent. Over the following meetings, always careful, always brief, always conducted in public places where conversation would not be remarked upon, they piece together what information they can gather. Simone has access to sources through her work at the newspaper. Armand has knowledge of the print shop and its clients. Together, they begin to construct a picture that becomes increasingly alarming. Duval had not merely been investigating corruption, but had been pursuing evidence of something more deliberate, more organized, more systemic. He had apparently discovered that certain prominent citizens, officials, businessmen, even church leaders, were not merely benefiting from corruption, but actively conspiring to maintain it, and that they were willing to eliminate threats to this arrangement. The realization settles over both of them like a weight. Duval has disappeared. The police have shown no interest in finding him. The newspapers have dropped his investigation, and somewhere in the spaces between words in a newspaper that Armand set in type, Duval had embedded a message that constitutes evidence. Armand finally breaks the code one evening, working by candlelight in his apartment, discovering that the unusual spacing, when properly decoded, contains names and dates and specific allegations. It is, in essence, a confession, or an accusation, or a record, a message from beyond disappearance, information that someone wanted preserved and believed Armand would eventually find. He shows the decoded message to Simone at their next meeting, and she goes very still. She reads it multiple times, her expression shifting from concentration to something that might be fear. She tells him, quietly, that the names on the list include people in positions of considerable authority, that publishing this information would be dangerous, that possession of it constitutes some form of risk that neither of them has fully calculated. Yet she also says something else, that Duval risked everything to create this record, that destroying it would constitute a betrayal, that bearing witness to what it contains is now their responsibility, whether they sought this responsibility or not. Winter arrives with particular severity that year, settling over Paris like an accusation. The streets become slick with ice and treacherous with the debris of urban life, frozen mud, discarded paper, the refuse of commerce rendered brittle by cold. Armand moves through these streets with a different awareness now, one that cannot be unlearned. He has begun to notice people watching him, or perhaps he has begun to imagine he is being watched, a distinction that becomes meaningless when the watching is real. A man appears twice at the print shop, asking casual questions about recent work. A woman passes his apartment building at irregular intervals, always lingering slightly longer than necessary. Whether these observations constitute actual surveillance, or merely the product of a mind now primed to see threat in innocent coincidence, remains uncertain. But the uncertainty itself becomes a form of pressure. The decoded message sits in his apartment, hidden inside a hollowed book, a volume of poetry that he has never read and no one would suspect him of owning. He has copied it multiple times in his own handwriting, creating redundancy in case one copy is discovered. The names on the list include individuals of considerable standing: a municipal councillor with family connections to the prefect, a banker with investments in railway contracts, a cardinal with influence over charitable institutions and their funds, a police captain whose jurisdiction covers the neighborhoods where certain questionable activities occur with particular frequency. The pattern, once Armand began to see it, became impossible to unsee. These were not isolated corrupt individuals, but participants in a coordinated system of mutual benefit and mutual protection. He has shown the decoded message to Simone, who has begun to conduct her own investigations through channels available to her at the newspaper. She visits the archive of old editions, examining dates and names, cross-referencing with other sources. She conducts discreet interviews with people who had known Duval, gathering observations about his state of mind in the days before his disappearance. She reports back to Armand during their carefully arranged encounters, meetings that now feel less like chance encounters and more like operations requiring strategic planning. They meet in cafes that are crowded enough to allow conversations without drawing attention, or in the public library where their presence would be unremarkable, or sometimes simply in the street, walking and talking as though engaged in ordinary discourse. What Simone discovers disturbs her in ways that are becoming increasingly visible. She tells him that Duval had confided in a colleague that he had stumbled upon evidence of something worse than corruption, evidence of deliberate elimination. 3 people had died in recent years, individuals who had either been investigating the same network or had threatened to expose it. One had fallen from a scaffold at a construction site, ruled an accident. Another had drowned in the Seine, officially classified as suicide. A third had died of a sudden illness that the attending physician had declared mysterious. In each case, the official narratives had closed the matter quickly, with no further investigation, as though official authority had collectively agreed these deaths required no scrutiny. Yet Duval had apparently recognized a pattern, had begun to suspect that these were not accidents or suicides or natural illnesses, but carefully arranged eliminations. Armand's response to this information is not fear, or rather, fear is present, but accompanied by something else, a recognition that he has become a participant in something that cannot be walked away from. To remain silent would be a form of complicity. To speak would be dangerous. The choice, once presented this clearly, is not really a choice at all, but rather a recognition that one path is ethically impossible, even if it is safer. He tells Simone that he is willing to help her pursue the investigation, to use his position at the print shop to gather information, to document whatever evidence they can obtain. He does not ask her if this is wise or safe, because he already knows the answer to both questions. The investigation becomes, for both of them, an obsession, conducted in the margins of their ordinary lives. Armand continues his work at the print shop with his usual precision, but now he pays specific attention to certain commissions. He notices when documents pass through the shop that seem to relate to the names on Duval's list. He observes when orders come for specific types of printing, limited editions, discrete distributions, jobs handled with unusual confidentiality. He copies nothing, takes no physical evidence, but absorbs information the way the shop's paper absorbs ink. He begins to construct a map in his mind of the network, the connections, the flow of money and power. Claude has noticed that something is different about him, though Claude is careful not to inquire directly. Their conversations have become increasingly strained, marked by careful silences and the kind of politeness that suggests a friendship is performing an imitation of itself. One afternoon, Claude pulls him aside with obvious reluctance and tells him, with uncomfortable directness, that it would be wise if Armand focused less on matters that do not concern him and more on his work. The warning is delivered with something that might be concern, but it is also clearly a threat, or perhaps a threat masked as concern. Armand asks Claude quietly if he has become involved in the network that Duval was investigating. Claude's face darkens, and he refuses to answer, which is itself an answer. This moment, the confrontation with Claude, marks a rupture in their friendship that feels simultaneously devastating and inevitable. Armand recognizes that Claude has not chosen corruption so much as corruption has chosen Claude, that his friend has been gradually compromised through a series of small compromises that accumulated into something larger than any individual choice. There is no dramatic confrontation, no grand denunciation. Instead, they return to working in proximity to one another with a hollow politeness that hurts more than outright conflict would. Armand realizes that this, perhaps, is what Duval had faced as well, the knowledge that institutions and systems were corrupt, that people he trusted were complicit, and that speaking would fracture every relationship he had built. A man appears at the print shop one evening when Armand is working late, as he increasingly does. The man is nondescript in appearance, middle-aged, dressed in a manner that could indicate either police or some other form of official authority. He does not identify himself specifically, but makes clear that he represents interests that are aware of Armand's recent activities and inquiries. He does not threaten directly, which would be crude. Instead, he suggests, with almost friendly courtesy, that certain questions are dangerous to ask, that certain investigations are better left to people equipped to conduct them, that Armand's skills are better employed in their proper function, setting type, rather than in matters of investigation. He also mentions with apparent casualness that accidents happen frequently in the printing trade, that machinery can be unpredictable, that people who work late shifts sometimes experience unfortunate incidents. The encounter leaves Armand shaking, though he does not allow himself to shake visibly until the man has departed. He sits at the compositor's bench in the empty shop, surrounded by the tools of his trade, aware that each of them could become an instrument of harm in the hands of someone willing to use them that way. The threat is clear. Stop asking questions, or face consequences that will be arranged to appear accidental. He also understands, from the nature of the threat, that they have identified him as the person who decoded Duval's message, that they know he possesses knowledge that is dangerous to them, that his elimination has been under consideration and remains under consideration. He tells Simone about the encounter during their next meeting, describing the man, the precise words that were used, the implications conveyed through the careful performance of friendliness. Simone listens with a growing expression of alarm, and for the first time since they have known each other, she appears genuinely frightened. She tells him that he should leave Paris, that they have become too visible, that the investigation has reached a point where caution is no longer possible, and flight is therefore necessary. Yet she also seems unable to abandon the work they have begun. She tells him that a sympathetic politician has begun to listen to their evidence, that there may be a path toward official investigation if they can present enough documentation, that giving up now would mean that Duval's death, for she is now convinced that Duval is dead, and deliberately so, would accomplish nothing except the preservation of corruption. Armand finds his apartment has been searched during his absence. Nothing obvious is missing, but the subtle disorder of it makes clear that someone has gone through his possessions. The book containing the first copy of the decoded message remains hidden, apparently undiscovered. But the violation of his private space creates a sense of exposure that sleep cannot erase. He realizes that he cannot safely return to his apartment, that it will be watched, that staying there would merely make him available to whatever harm has been decided upon. He takes the book containing the message and a change of clothing and tells no one where he is going except Simone, meeting her briefly to provide a location where she can contact him if necessary. He spends the following days moving between safe locations, a cheap hotel in the 19th arrondissement, a room above a cafe where the proprietor is sympathetic to radical causes, the back room of a bookshop whose owner once printed anarchist pamphlets and therefore understands the value of discretion. The city becomes hostile and strange during these days of hiding. He moves through streets he does not normally frequent, aware of every person who might be following him, of every shadow that might conceal observation. He reads newspapers to track any developments, alert to whether Duval's body has been discovered, or whether the network has attempted to accelerate their removal of threats by creating new incidents that might be attributed to accident or misadventure. It is during this period that Simone brings him crucial information. She has discovered documentation of payments made from municipal accounts to individuals matching the names on Duval's list, payments that cannot be explained through official channels. She has also found records of communication, letters, notes, documented meetings that suggest coordination between the various members of the network. More importantly, she has located a sympathetic official, a magistrate, who appears to have become aware that something was amiss and is willing to listen to their evidence if it can be presented in sufficiently concrete form. Simone also tells him something else, something that requires them to sit in silence for several moments after she speaks it. She has discovered that Duval's sister has been approached by someone representing the network, offering her money in exchange for her silence about her brother's disappearance. The approach itself was clumsy, which suggests either desperation or confidence that she would be too frightened to resist. Simone had managed to speak with Duval's sister, a woman named Isabel, who works as a governess, and learned that Isabel has become aware of considerably more than the network probably realizes. She has kept her brother's papers, personal correspondence, drafts of unpublished investigations, notes regarding the individuals he had been pursuing. All of this documentation remains hidden, but Isabel would provide it if there were genuine possibility of justice resulting from it. The pieces of an investigation are accumulating, but they remain scattered, incomplete, requiring someone with authority to assemble them into a coherent whole. Simone is working toward this, cultivating the sympathetic magistrate, gathering documentation, building a case. Yet Armand recognizes that they have reached a peculiar threshold. They possess enough information to constitute a genuine threat to the network, which means they have crossed the line from being merely inconvenient to being genuinely dangerous. The network's response will escalate. The man who appeared at the print shop was a warning. What comes next will not be warning, but action. Armand feels, for perhaps the first time in his life, genuinely afraid in a way that is not manageable through precision or work or the careful construction of routine. He is afraid not primarily for himself, though self-preservation remains a concern, but for Simone, for Isabel, for the fragile possibility that what they have begun might actually result in accountability rather than simply in their own elimination. He is afraid because he has discovered that kindness, genuine, reckless kindness, exists in the world, in people like Simone, who continues to pursue this investigation despite the danger, and that this kindness deserves to be protected rather than sacrificed to the indifference of systems designed to eliminate inconvenient people. The body surfaces in the Seine on a Tuesday morning, caught against one of the stone supports beneath the Pont Marie, bloated and discolored by water and time. It takes 3 days for the authorities to identify it as Henri Duval. 3 days during which the newspapers report the discovery with the bland procedural language reserved for unremarkable deaths. A man has drowned. An investigation is underway. Witnesses are being sought. By the time the identity is confirmed and announced, the initial shock has already dissipated into the baseline indifference that Paris reserves for its dead poor and its dead inconvenient. The official narrative emerges almost immediately. Duval had been experiencing financial difficulties. He had been drinking heavily. Depression had overtaken him. Suicide is the conclusion reached with remarkable speed, and even more remarkable, lack of investigation. Armand reads these reports in various newspapers, watching how different publications frame the same facts, with subtle variations designed to shape interpretation. Some emphasize the financial troubles, suggesting a man brought low by economic failure. Others focus on the drinking, implying a moral weakness that had accumulated into despair. One particularly vicious editorial notes that certain journalists had become increasingly erratic in their professional judgments, hinting at mental instability masquerading as crusading journalism. The cumulative effect of these narratives is to transform Duvall from a man who had been deliberately killed into a tragic figure, whose death was ultimately his own fault. A narrative that is simultaneously more merciful and more damning than simple murder. Simone arrives at the safe house where Armand has been staying with the appearance of someone who has not slept and has no intention of beginning to do so. She carries with her a package wrapped in cloth delivered to her by Isabelle, Duvall's sister, who has decided that discretion serves no purpose now that her brother is dead. The package contains a ledger, a leather-bound book filled with Duvall's handwriting, documenting his investigation with the kind of meticulous detail that one might expect from a man trained in journalism, but pursuing work that demanded the precision of evidence rather than narrative. The ledger is, in essence, a record of corruption rendered in personal narrative, a man's notes to himself as he gradually uncovered the architecture of a conspiracy. Armand spends the following night reading the ledger, and in reading it, he experiences something that approximates the sensation of standing at the edge of an abyss. The scope of what Duvall had discovered is vastly larger than what they had initially understood. It is not merely a local corruption network, but a systematic arrangement involving officials at multiple levels of municipal government, church authorities, police administrators, and prominent businessmen whose names appear in society pages and philanthropic announcements. The ledger documents how money flows between entities that ostensibly have no connection to one another, how decisions that appear to be made through normal governmental processes are actually predetermined in private meetings, how opposition to this arrangement has been systematically eliminated. More disturbing than the scope of corruption are the specific entries regarding what Duvall had termed the removals. 3 individuals are listed by name, with dates, circumstances, and Duvall's assessment of probability regarding their actual causes of death. The first, a municipal inspector who had begun asking questions about construction contracts, died in a fall from scaffolding 3 years prior. The second, a journalist working for a rival publication, drowned in the Seine 5 years ago. The third, a minor official attempting to expose misallocation of charitable funds, had died of a sudden fever that rendered him unconscious and unresponsive within hours. In each case, Duvall had noted the official cause of death, then recorded his own suspicions, which centered on the use of poisons or drugs administered in ways that would leave minimal trace evidence and would be attributed to accident or natural causes. The ledger contains additional entries that are even more alarming. Duvall had documented his own precautions, messages left with trusted individuals, evidence hidden in multiple locations, the deliberate embedding of codes within his journalism that would allow him to leave a record if something happened to him. He had also recorded his growing awareness that he was being followed, that his apartment had been searched, that meetings had been arranged to warn him away from his investigation. The final entries, written in increasingly hurried and less careful handwriting, document his decision to create the special edition, to embed his evidence in the spacing of the text, to trust his work to the compositor whose precision he had come to respect, through observing how carefully Armand had handled previous investigations. The final entry, dated just 3 days before Duval's body was discovered, reads, "If I do not complete this work, the evidence will remain in the margins. Someone will read it. Someone will care. This is my final faith, that precision matters, that attention matters, that someone will notice what has been placed where it was meant to be noticed. I have done what I can. The rest is in other hands now." Simone and Armand sit together in the dim light of the safe house, and for a long time neither speaks. The ledger sits between them, a physical object that transforms their investigation from the realm of suspicion into something that approximates proof. Yet proof is useless without someone willing to act on it, without authority willing to acknowledge it, without institutional power willing to overturn institutional power. The sympathetic magistrate that Simone has been cultivating suddenly seems like a fragile hope, a single official against an entire system designed to protect itself. It is Simone who breaks the silence, speaking with a voice that is steady but carries underneath it something approaching despair. She tells him that Isabelle has also provided copies of correspondence between Duval and various individuals, documentation that supports the entries in the ledger. She tells him that the magistrate has agreed to receive them if they approach carefully, if they present the material in a way that protects both themselves and the official. She also tells him that she does not believe anything will actually change, that the system is too entrenched, that the removal of Duval was likely calculated as sufficient intimidation to prevent further investigation. She tells him this, and then she asks him what he wants to do. The question is more profound than it appears on the surface. Armand could take the ledger and the correspondence and disappear into the provinces, or another city, or even another country. He could abandon the investigation, claim ignorance if questioned, return to the work of setting type, and gradually fade back into the anonymity that characterized his life before Duval's special edition arrived at the print shop. The fact that this option is available to him, and that he is aware of its availability, makes his refusal of it more significant than simply continuing would be. He tells Simone that they should approach the magistrate, that they should present the evidence, that whatever comes after that is beyond their control, but that the attempt itself matters. They arrange the meeting with the magistrate through careful intermediaries, presenting themselves as citizens with evidence of serious criminal conduct. The magistrate, a man named Leclerc, who is perhaps 50 years old and whose position suggests someone who has navigated the complexities of French bureaucracy with sufficient political skill to retain authority, receives them in his office after hours, when official business is concluded and they are less likely to be observed. He examines the ledger and the correspondence with expressions that shift between concentration and something that might be alarm. When he has completed his review, he sits back in his chair and informs them that what they have brought him constitutes evidence of crimes that are both significant and widely protected. Leclerc tells them, with the tone of someone explaining an unfortunate fact of nature, that the individuals named in Duval's ledger include people with considerable influence over police investigations, judicial proceedings, and political outcomes. He tells them that prosecuting such individuals would require political will that does not currently exist, that it would face resistance from multiple levels of authority, that it might ultimately accomplish nothing except to create dangerous enemies. Yet he also tells them something else. He tells them that the evidence itself is significant enough to warrant investigation, that there are enough irregularities in the official causes of death to justify reopening certain cases, that if they are willing to provide more specific documentation, and if he is willing to risk his position, something might actually be accomplished. The arrangement that emerges from this meeting is necessarily cautious and limited. Leclerc will re-examine the 3 deaths recorded in Duvallet's ledger as possible removals. He will conduct inquiries into the financial arrangements documented in the correspondence. He will do this slowly, carefully, in ways that do not alert the network that they are under investigation. Simone will continue her work at the newspaper, gathering additional documentation, watching for any developments. Armand will remain hidden, available to provide context regarding the materials they have assembled, but essentially inactive, and therefore less visible to whoever might be seeking him. The waiting that follows this agreement is more difficult than any of the preceding danger had been. Danger, at least, requires response. Waiting requires the cultivation of patience and the management of fear without any concrete outlet for either. Days pass without development. Weeks accumulate. Armand remains in his various safe locations, reading newspapers, tracking any hints that investigations are proceeding, attempting to discern from tiny variations in official announcements whether anything is actually happening. The 3 deaths that Duval had identified remain officially unchanged in their causes. No new investigations are announced. The network continues its operations, apparently undisturbed. It is during this period of waiting that Armand receives news that the print shop has been destroyed. The fire occurred on an evening when no one was present, consuming the building entirely, destroying the presses, the type, the records, all of it reduced to ash and charred wood. The authorities have ruled it accidental, caused by an overturned lamp or perhaps a smoldering spark left from the day's work. Claude Mercier died in the fire, or rather, his body was discovered in the ruins the morning after the fire was extinguished. The official explanation is that he had been working late and was trapped when the fire spread. A tragic accident, the newspapers report. A skilled tradesman lost to misfortune. The news hits Armand with a force that he is unprepared for. Claude is dead. His oldest friend, compromised though he was, complicit though he may have been, dead in what is clearly an arranged elimination designed to appear accidental. The message implicit in Claude's death is clear. The network is aware of Armand's investigation. They are demonstrating their power through destruction. They are warning him that there are no safe spaces, that the people he associates with will be targeted, that continued pursuit of this investigation guarantees the multiplication of casualties. Yet the message also contains a secondary implication. Claude's death, arranged to look accidental, follows exactly the pattern that Duval had documented in the ledger. It is a message in itself, confirmation that the network operates exactly as Duval had suspected. When Armand is taken into police custody 3 days after the print shop fire, the officers who arrive at his hiding location are polite and professional. They do not beat him or threaten him verbally. They simply inform him that he is wanted for questioning regarding the fire, that his presence at the scene cannot be accounted for, that certain witnesses claim to have seen someone matching his description near the building on the evening of the fire. The accusations are nonsensical, easily refutable, but that is precisely the point. The police do not actually believe he set the fire. The police are operating on instructions to detain him, to hold him long enough to either break him or to provide the network with an opportunity to eliminate him while he is in custody. The interrogation that follows is not particularly brutal. Instead, it is conducted through a kind of bureaucratic monotony, endless questioning about inconsequential details, repetition of accusations, mixed with offers of leniency if he will simply confess. He is kept awake, but not tortured. He is fed, but not well. He is placed in a cell and left alone for extended periods, the isolation itself a form of pressure. During one of these solitary periods, he considers the possibility that this is where he will remain, that Simone will be unable or unwilling to help, that his investigation will simply end here in a cell, unresolved, accomplished but ineffective. It is Simone who secures his release, bringing with her documentation that he had been at a public event on the evening of the fire, providing witnesses who can corroborate his presence elsewhere, exercising whatever influence she possesses to demand that he be released or that specific charges be filed. The police, faced with this pressure and aware that holding him without charges becomes increasingly difficult, eventually allow him to leave. The moment he exits the police prefecture into the cold Paris evening, he becomes aware that everything has changed. The boundaries between investigation and danger, between activity and flight, between hope and despair, have all collapsed into a single compressed moment of clarity. The network knows who he is, knows where to find him, and has demonstrated their willingness to eliminate anyone connected to his investigation. The only path forward is to accelerate the process, to push the evidence toward its conclusion, to risk everything on the possibility that the truth, once fully exposed, becomes too substantial to suppress. The night of the fire arrives with a particular quality of cold that makes the air itself seem brittle, as though the city might fracture under its own weight. Armand is not present. This is the first fact that matters, the first fact that saves him, but he learns of it through Simone, who arrives at his new hiding place with the expression of someone who has witnessed something that has broken something inside her. The print shop near the Place de la Bastille, the shop where he has worked for so many years, where his hands have learned their precision, where the rhythms of his labor have created the structure of his adult life, this shop is burning. By the time she arrives to tell him, the fire has already consumed it entirely, the building reduced to a skeleton of charred beams, the presses twisted into unrecognizable shapes, everything he has built through decades of work, converted into ash and smoke, and the acrid smell that clings to clothes and skin and hair. He does not allow himself to feel the loss immediately. Instead, his mind performs a kind of inventory, cataloging what has been destroyed. The type cases with their thousands of carefully sorted letters, the proofs of important work, the records that documented the print shop's commissions, the small archive of materials he had kept hidden in the basement. Most significantly, the physical space where his days had been organized has been eliminated. The fire has accomplished what the network intended. It has destroyed evidence, removed a location where he might be sought, and demonstrated, through Claude's death, the price of continuing the investigation. Claude's body is discovered in the ruins the following morning. The official explanation arrives almost immediately, as though prepared in advance. Claude had been working late, as was sometimes his habit when important commissions required attention. The fire had started, probably from a lamp overturned or a spark left from the day's work. He had been trapped, unable to escape through the smoke. It was a tragedy, the police report states with bureaucratic sympathy. A skilled tradesman lost to misfortune. The narrative is already crystallized before any genuine investigation could begin. Armand stands in the street several blocks from the ruined print shop, watching as workers clear the debris, as officials document the damage, as Paris continues its indifferent motion around the site of destruction. A man stands beside him, someone he does not recognize, who speaks to him without preamble. "You should understand what has occurred. Your friend was removed because he had become unreliable. His death serves multiple purposes. It eliminates a potential witness, and it demonstrates to you what will happen to those you care about if you continue." The man does not identify himself, does not linger for response. He simply delivers the message and departs, leaving Armand with the clarifying knowledge that everything he has done has resulted not in progress toward accountability, but in the multiplication of casualties. The police arrival at his hiding place comes without warning. Two officers, professional and polite, inform him that he is wanted for questioning regarding the fire. The accusations they present are transparently false. He could not possibly have been at the print shop at the time the fire started, as there are multiple witnesses to his presence elsewhere. Yet the falsity of the accusations is entirely the point. They are not interested in genuine investigation. They are interested in detention, in making him available, in creating conditions under which elimination might occur more easily. He is taken to the police prefecture, placed in an interrogation room, asked the same questions repeatedly in slightly different formulations, offered leniency if he will simply confess to arson. The interrogation extends across 3 days. He is not beaten, which in some ways is worse than beating would be, because the bureaucratic monotony of the questioning accomplishes through accumulation what violence would accomplish more quickly. He is kept awake through repeated questioning. He is fed poorly. He is placed in a cell and left alone for extended periods. The isolation itself, a pressure designed to break resolve through the simple weight of time and confinement. During one of these solitary periods, sitting on a narrow cot in a cell that smells of human waste and despair, he experiences what might be called a moment of clarity, or might simply be called acceptance of his own helplessness. He has pursued an investigation into a network of power that is entirely indifferent to his individual efforts. He has witnessed that network eliminate people with casual competence. He has no resources, no allies of sufficient influence, no institutional power to oppose them. The trajectory of events has moved inexorably toward this point. Isolation, confinement, the slow removal of any possibility of effective action. It is Simone who saves him from this trajectory, though salvation is a peculiar word for what she accomplishes. She arrives at the police prefecture with documentation that he was present at a public event, a lecture at a literary society, on the evening of the fire. She provides witnesses who can corroborate his presence. She brings letters from individuals of sufficient standing to make continued detention increasingly legally questionable. She does not rely on appeals to justice or truth, which would be ineffective against a police force operating under the instruction of powerful men. Instead, she relies on the formal requirements of law, on the technical procedures that must be followed even when those procedures are inconvenient to authority, on the simple fact that holding someone indefinitely without charges creates paperwork that becomes difficult to justify. The process is slow. It extends across several days of negotiations conducted through intermediaries, of paperwork filed and reviewed, of subtle pressure applied through institutional channels. Eventually, the police inform him that he will be released, that insufficient evidence exists to support the accusations, that he is free to go. The relief of this release is profound but incomplete. He emerges from the police prefecture into an afternoon that is cold and somehow hostile in its ordinary indifference. The city continues around him, vendors selling food, children playing in squares, people conducting their daily business, while he has been transformed into someone hunted, someone whose presence is dangerous to others, someone whose continued investigation has resulted in the death of his oldest friend and the destruction of everything he has built. Simone meets him at a cafe several blocks from the prefecture, and they sit at a small table in the corner, speaking in low voices, as though the other customers might be interested in their conversation. She tells him that Leclerc, the sympathetic magistrate, has begun a preliminary investigation into the 3 deaths documented in Duval's ledger. She tells him that the investigation is proceeding slowly and carefully because any premature revelation would alert the network and result in destruction of evidence or further elimination of potential witnesses. She tells him that they have begun to accumulate additional documentation, financial records that show payments moving through channels that cannot be easily explained, correspondence between network members that suggests coordination of their activities. Yet she also tells him something else, something that she seems reluctant to articulate. She tells him that she does not believe anything will actually change, that the system is too entrenched, that the removal of Duval and Claude has likely been calculated as sufficient to prevent further investigation. She tells him that she has been threatened in subtle ways, a man appearing in the street near her residence, letters arriving with no postage, suggesting internal delivery, her workplace becoming colder toward her as word of her association with dangerous inquiries has spread. She tells him that she is afraid, genuinely afraid, not in an abstract sense, but in the immediate and physical way that comes from understanding that powerful people have designated you as an inconvenient obstacle to be removed. They sit together in the cafe, and Armand finds himself aware of something that he has kept carefully hidden through all the months of investigation and danger. He is aware that he cares about Simone, that her safety matters to him more than his own safety matters to him, that the thought of the network targeting her creates in him a desperation that approaches the intensity of physical pain. He does not articulate this awareness. Instead, they sit in silence for several minutes, and then he reaches across the table and takes her hand, a gesture that is simultaneously a comfort and an admission of something that has been carefully suppressed through all the months of their collaboration. They arrange for temporary housing in different locations, deciding that proximity increases the likelihood of surveillance discovering both of them. Simone moves to a boarding house in the 12th arrondissement, a place where her presence will be unremarkable. Armand moves to a small hotel in Belleville, a neighborhood populated with working people and radicals, where outsiders are less noticed than they might be in more established areas. They communicate through intermediaries, messages left at bookshops or left with sympathetic cafe proprietors, and they meet only rarely and only in public spaces where their presence together might appear coincidental. During one of these meetings, Simone tells him that she has discovered something in Duval's private papers that he had not recorded in the ledger. Duval had apparently discovered that the network was planning to expand its operations, to consolidate control over additional municipal functions, to eliminate the remaining individuals within government who might resist their arrangement. The expansion required removal of a current official, a man named Tessier who held a minor but strategically important position within the prefect's office. The planning documents Simone had found suggested that Tessier's removal was scheduled to occur within the next month, that it would be arranged to appear as a heart attack or sudden illness, that his replacement was already being arranged. The coincidence of the name, Tessier, strikes them both simultaneously, though Armand's reaction is different because it is personal. Tessier is not his relative, as far as he knows, but the name carries within it a strange resonance, as though the network is operating so completely within all levels of society that even random connections become significant. More importantly, the discovery that the network intends to eliminate this official within a specific time frame suggests that the system is not merely defending itself, but actively expanding. That the removal of Duval and Claude has not reduced their ambitions, but has perhaps confirmed their confidence that obstacles can be eliminated with impunity. It is this realization that crystallizes something in both of them. The understanding that waiting, that patience, that the careful accumulation of evidence is a strategy that assumes the network will remain static. Instead, the network is evolving, becoming more ambitious, moving toward consolidation of power that would make future opposition impossible. They meet with Leclerc and inform him that they wish to accelerate the process, that they are willing to risk exposure by bringing their evidence to journalists and politicians simultaneously, that the alternative is to watch as the network completes its consolidation and thereby removes any remaining institutional resistance. Leclerc's response is a mixture of professional caution and something that might be recognition of necessity. He tells them that accelerating the investigation creates significant risk, that the network will certainly respond aggressively if they sense that exposure is imminent, that any premature revelation might result in elimination of both evidence and investigators. Yet he also tells them that he understands their reasoning, that he agrees that the system appears to be moving toward a point beyond which reform becomes impossible, that perhaps the risk is justified by the alternative. The decision is made during a night when Armand and Simone sit together in a small apartment, borrowed from a sympathetic acquaintance. They do not discuss it extensively because there is little to discuss. They understand the risks. They understand that the network will respond to exposure with whatever means are available to them. They understand that they might die, that others connected to them might die, that the investigation might ultimately accomplish nothing except to create a more efficient form of cover-up. Yet they also understand that the alternative, silence, abandonment of the investigation, acceptance of corruption as inevitable, is itself a form of death. A death of the part of themselves that recognizes injustice and feels compelled to oppose it. Simone leans against him in the darkness of the borrowed apartment, and he puts his arm around her in a gesture that feels like both protection and admission of shared vulnerability. She speaks very quietly, almost to herself. Duval trusted you because he understood something about the way you work, the precision, the attention to detail, the refusal to accept surface explanations. He left the message in the margins because he believed someone like you would eventually notice it. We cannot make him unnoticed now. We cannot unmake what he discovered. We can only carry it forward and hope that carrying it forward means something. The underground printing operation exists in a basement beneath a sympathetic bookshop in the Latin Quarter, a space that once served as storage for remainder copies and damaged volumes. The equipment is modest: a small hand press, collected type, supplies gathered from various sources, but it is sufficient for what needs to be accomplished. Armand has returned, in this space, to the fundamental work of his trade, setting type for documents that will be distributed beyond the network's reach. He works at night, after the bookshop closes, in conditions that are cramped and cold, and filled with a particular quality of tension that comes from knowing that discovery would result in immediate arrest and probable elimination. The arrangement has been made possible through intermediaries and connections that operate in the shadowed spaces of Paris. Simone's contacts at the newspaper have proven willing to distribute printed material to other journalists, to politicians sympathetic to reform, to individuals within government who have been waiting for evidence sufficient to justify action against the network. The first series of articles is prepared based on Duval's ledger and the supporting documentation they have assembled. The articles name names. They provide specific dates and amounts. They describe the systematic arrangement through which corruption has been organized and protected. They do not rely on speculation, but on documented fact, correspondence, financial records, witness testimony. Armand works with another printer, a man named Rousseau, who has printed radical pamphlets for years and understands both the technical requirements of careful work and the security requirements of printing materials that are dangerous to powerful people. Rousseau is taciturn and careful, moving through the work with a precision that equals Armand's own. They speak rarely, communicating through gestures and the language of their shared trade. The printing proceeds slowly because speed is secondary to accuracy. Every letter must be correct. Every number must correspond to the documentation. The work becomes, in its own way, a meditation on the power of words made material, of truth rendered into objects that can be distributed, reproduced, preserved beyond any single individual's control. The articles are printed in limited quantities and distributed through channels designed to make tracing them difficult. Copies arrive at newspaper offices. Copies appear on the desks of politicians. Copies are left in public locations where they will be found and read. Within days, the first article appears in a major newspaper, written by a journalist who has been sympathetic to the investigation, but has waited for sufficient evidence to justify publication. The article is careful in its language, presenting the information as allegations based on documentation rather than as proven facts. Yet the documentation itself, reproduced alongside the article, makes clear that these are not baseless accusations, but systematic findings based on evidence. The response from the network is immediate and visible. Within hours, the prefect's office issues a statement denouncing the allegations as false and slanderous. Officials named in the articles deny involvement in any impropriety. The Cardinal's office issues a carefully worded response, suggesting that the accusations represent a misunderstanding of legitimate charitable activities. Yet the response itself is evidence. The speed with which it arrives, the defensive tone despite claimed innocence, the coordination visible in the various denials, all of it suggests that the allegations have struck something genuine, that the network is reacting to a genuine threat rather than merely dismissing false accusations. More importantly, the publication of the articles creates space for others to act. Leclerc moves forward with preliminary investigations that he had been conducting carefully and in isolation. Other magistrates, emboldened by the public attention to the corruption, begin to re-examine cases that had been officially closed. Journalists at other newspapers, sensing a story of genuine significance, begin their own investigations. The singular exposure that Armand and Simone had been attempting becomes, through the mechanism of public revelation, something vastly larger than any individual investigation could accomplish. Simone continues to work at the newspaper, increasingly visible in the investigation as it becomes public and therefore safer. She writes articles expanding on the original revelations, following leads that emerge as the story develops, interviewing individuals who have been harmed by the network's activities. The woman who once worked in the shadows of investigation finds herself increasingly public, recognized on the street, contacted by people with information to share. She appears at meetings with magistrates and politicians. She gives interviews to other journalists. She becomes, through the accumulation of visible work, a public advocate for the investigation, and therefore significantly more difficult for the network to simply eliminate without creating the kind of attention that would bring their entire operation into question. The second and third printing operations proceed in the basement beneath the bookshop. Additional articles are prepared, each building on the previous revelations, each providing new documentation, each compelling new segments of society to acknowledge what is occurring. Armand's hands continue their work, setting type for words that will reshape the political landscape of Paris. The physical labor of printing connects him to something larger than his individual effort. He is aware that he is participating in something that extends beyond the personal, that his precision is serving not merely his own investigation, but a process of accountability that involves many people, many institutions, many overlapping efforts. Yet the network does not simply accept this exposure and retire. They respond through their remaining channels of power. Police pressure on the newspaper intensifies. Magistrates sympathetic to investigations are suddenly reassigned or face questions about their conduct. Judges consider motions to suppress certain evidence as potentially obtained improperly. The full apparatus of institutional power mobilizes to contain the damage, to protect as much of the network as possible, to frame the revelations as exaggerations or misinterpretations, rather than as evidence of systematic corruption. It is during this period that Isabelle, Duval's sister, comes forward publicly with her brother's private papers. She appears in an official statement, providing the documentation that Duval had preserved, allowing it to be examined by magistrates and journalists. Her emergence from hidden support into public testimony is an act of considerable courage, because it makes her visible to the network, places her at risk. Yet it also makes her protected by public attention in ways that hidden activity would not. She describes her brother's investigation with the precision of someone who has read his work extensively. She provides context for his concerns, She testifies to his care in documenting evidence, rather than merely alleging wrongdoing. A trial is eventually arranged, initially as a preliminary hearing, to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to prosecute individuals for corruption and abuse of power. The hearing is public, drawing crowds of observers, journalists, and ordinary Parisians interested in whether accountability is actually possible within the system. Armand is called to testify regarding his work on Duvallet's special edition, regarding the hidden messages embedded in the spacing, regarding his observations of how the print shop had been used as a conduit for propaganda and controlled information. He presents his testimony simply and directly, avoiding drama, explaining the technical aspects of his work and its connection to the evidence being presented. Under questioning by the prosecution, he describes how he came to notice the unusual spacing in Duvallet's final edition. He explains the process of decoding the hidden message, though he is careful not to claim expertise he does not possess. He describes his discovery that the spaces contained names and allegations of corruption. He describes the investigation that followed, his collaboration with Simone, his discoveries about the scope of the network's activities. When questioned by the defense regarding whether he might have misinterpreted the spacing or whether the hidden message might have been accidental, he responds with the quiet authority of someone who has spent decades working with type. Precision in typography is not accidental. Nothing he observed in Duvallet's final edition was the result of chance or carelessness. Claude's death is revisited during the trial, though not as prominently as Armand might have expected. The authorities who had investigated the fire initially, under instructions from the network, had concluded it was accidental. Yet, during the trial proceedings, new investigations into the fire are announced, this time conducted by magistrates sympathetic to the corruption investigation. Witnesses come forward who had observed suspicious circumstances on the evening of the fire. An arsonist is identified through careful investigation, a man known to perform illegal services for people with money and power. The arsonist testifies, eventually, in exchange for reduced charges, that he had been hired to set the fire, and that he had been paid by intermediaries representing individuals whose names he did not initially know, but whom he later identifies through photographs. The identification of the arsonist and the revelation of the deliberate nature of the fire transforms the case from corruption into something more serious: conspiracy to commit murder. This escalation brings different levels of scrutiny to bear, involves different authorities, makes the entire operation of the network suddenly much more difficult to protect through institutional manipulation. Several members of the network moved to deny involvement, to claim that they were unaware of such activities, to attempt to separate themselves from the direct commission of crimes, even as they admit to participation in less serious corruption. Others simply disappear, fleeing Paris or France entirely, abandoning their positions and their standing rather than face prosecution. The trials that follow are lengthy and complex, involving multiple defendants, numerous charges, vast amounts of documentation. Not everyone who is involved in the network faces prosecution. Not everyone who faces prosecution is convicted. Some of the more powerful individuals manage to distance themselves sufficiently from direct involvement in the most serious crimes that prosecution becomes technically difficult. Yet, significant accountability does occur. Several municipal officials are convicted of corruption and abuse of office. The Cardinal's office agrees to a settlement regarding misallocation of charitable funds, though without admission of wrongdoing by the Cardinal himself. The police captain, who had been protecting the network's activities, is dismissed and faces investigation for his role in obstruction of justice. Duval's death is officially reinvestigated. The conclusion is changed from suicide to murder, with evidence presented suggesting that he was eliminated because his investigation had become too threatening to the network's continued operations. No prosecution occurs because the individual who directly caused his death cannot be identified with sufficient certainty. But the official acknowledgement that Duval was murdered transforms his status from a man whose death was tragic but understandable into a man who was killed for pursuing truth. His memory receives recognition. His work is cited as evidence. His final edition becomes an example in journalistic training of how to embed truth within systems designed to suppress it. Armand does not appear in the newspapers often after his initial testimony. He testifies, provides evidence, answers questions, but he does not seek public attention, and the public attention that might otherwise focus on him is diverted to more prominent figures, politicians, magistrates, journalists. He maintains a distance from the triumphalism that sometimes accompanies the successful prosecution of corruption, aware that the underlying systems that permitted such corruption remain largely intact. The network has been disrupted, its most visible members removed or compromised. But the institutional structures that allowed it to operate, the overlap between government and business interests, the inadequate oversight of public spending, the protection of authority figures from ordinary accountability, these remain largely unchanged. Yet something has shifted. The principle that even powerful people might face consequences for their actions has been reinforced. The idea that corruption can be exposed and punished has been demonstrated to be possible, at least in this particular case. The notion that precision matters, that attention to detail matters, that bearing witness to what is actually occurring matters, these ideas have been validated through the entire process. Simone has become a recognized journalist, her work on the investigation establishing her reputation as someone willing to pursue truth despite danger. Leclerc has been promoted, his careful work during the investigation earning him recognition and increased authority. And Armand finds himself in a peculiar position. He is technically unemployed, his workplace destroyed, his life in Paris marked by his association with the investigation. He is also, paradoxically, more visible than he has ever been. People recognize him on the street. Newspaper accounts of the trials mention his role in decoding Duval's message. There are subtle suggestions that he might seek employment with various newspapers or printing operations, that his skills and his reputation would be valued. Yet the attention disturbs him. He has not sought recognition, and the recognition that comes feels like a distortion of what actually occurred, as though his role has been inflated, his efforts rendered more dramatic than they were, as though he has been transformed into something other than what he actually is. The town exists approximately 120 kilometers south of Paris, situated along a river that moves lazily through agricultural land and small villages, where time seems to operate according to different principles than it does in the city. Saint-Denis-sur-Loire is not entirely unknown. It has a market square, a church, several cafes, a newspaper that appears 3 times weekly and covers local events with meticulous attention to agricultural seasons and minor administrative decisions. It is the kind of place that people leave when they are young, and sometimes return to when they are old. A place where the rhythms of labor are tied to natural cycles, rather than to industrial schedules. Armand arrives here in the spring, carrying 2 leather satchels containing his possessions, his clothes, his books, and nothing else of significance. The printing operation at the local newspaper is modest compared to the Paris shop where he spent his adult years. The equipment is older, maintained carefully through long habit rather than through regular replacement. The proprietor, a man named Benoit, who is perhaps 15 years Armand's senior, has received letters of introduction suggesting that Armand is a skilled compositor, seeking a quieter life after difficult times in Paris. Benoit asks few questions about these circumstances. He is pleased to have someone of obvious skill available to manage his small operation. He offers housing, a room above the newspaper office, and wages that are modest but sufficient. Armand accepts without negotiation, because negotiation requires engagement with the future in ways he is not yet prepared to engage. The work itself is similar to work he has done his entire adult life, yet fundamentally different in its context and meaning. The newspapers he sets type for address local concerns, the price of grain, the condition of roads, the announcements of births and deaths in the community, the notices of town council meetings, the advertisements for goods and services available within walking distance. The investigations are small, the occasional investigation into a misappropriated town fund, or questions about a contractor's work on the bridge, but they are investigations conducted without the weight of systemic corruption, without the presence of powerful forces attempting to suppress truth. The rhythm of the work is slower. There is time to notice details, to become aware of the community beyond the mechanical process of composition. The room above the newspaper becomes his true residence for the first time since his childhood. It is sparse: a bed, a table, a chair, a shelf for books. But it is his, and no one attempts to search it or to enter it without permission. He establishes a routine that does not depend on danger or vigilance. He wakes early, works through the morning and afternoon, takes an evening meal at a cafe where the proprietor knows his name and his preferences. He reads in the evenings, occasionally walks through the town in the later hours when the streets are quieter. The predictability of this routine is initially uncomfortable, as though he has not earned peace, as though something will arrive to shatter it. Yet gradually, through the accumulation of ordinary days, he begins to accept that the peace might be genuine. The newspaper maintains a careful independence from political authority, or as much independence as a small provincial newspaper can maintain when political authority is always present in subtle forms. Benoit has strong opinions about local corruption, a mayor who misuses town funds, contractors who deliver inferior work, and he publishes these opinions regularly, with sufficient documentation that they cannot easily be dismissed as mere opinion. Yet the stakes are different from what Armand witnessed in Paris. The corruption here is local, manageable, subject to the pressure of community opinion and the possibility of genuine accountability through ordinary municipal mechanisms. It is, in its own way, a reminder that corruption is not inevitable, that systems can function with reasonable honesty when the stakes are lower and the visibility is higher. Armand trains the younger apprentices who work at the newspaper, teaching them not merely the technical aspects of composition, but something of his philosophy regarding precision. He shows them how to set type with absolute accuracy, how to notice and correct errors before they are printed, how the seemingly mechanical work of composition is actually an act of respect for the truth that is being presented. One of the apprentices, a boy named Pierre, who is perhaps 17 years old, appears to understand something of what Armand is attempting to communicate. Pierre asks careful questions about why precision matters, why it would be better to spend extra time ensuring accuracy rather than rushing to complete the work. Armand tells him that printing is perhaps the only work where one's individual mistake can affect hundreds or thousands of people, that this responsibility to preserve truth and accuracy in the face of pressure to move quickly or to accept approximation is what makes printing worthy of being called a craft rather than merely labor. Letters arrive occasionally from Paris. Simone writes with descriptions of her continuing work as a journalist, of the developments in the various trials arising from the corruption investigations, of the ordinary struggles of navigating a profession that remains male-dominated and suspicious of women who pursue it with serious intent. She writes that she thinks of him regularly, that she wonders if he has found what he was seeking, that she hopes the quiet he sought is proving to be what he needed. She does not ask him to return to Paris. She does not suggest that their separation is temporary. Instead, she writes with a tone that acknowledges the separation as real and permanent, while maintaining the connection through the act of writing itself. Leclerc writes occasionally as well, brief letters providing updates on developments in the investigation. He tells Armand that the trials are concluding, that convictions have been secured, that the network has been disrupted sufficiently that its previous level of coordinated activity is no longer possible. He tells Armand that his work in decoding Duval's message and his subsequent testimony have been instrumental in achieving outcomes that constitute, at least, a qualified success. He also tells Armand that the position of the network's former allies has been weakened, that reform is becoming possible in ways it was not previously, that the principle of accountability for corruption has been established in ways that may have long-term effects. These letters are formal in tone, written by an official to someone who has served a useful purpose, yet they also convey recognition and something approaching gratitude. It is during his second spring in Saint-Denis-sur-Loire that Armand meets the woman who tends the library attached to the church. Her name is Marguerite, not the same Marguerite he had married years ago, but another woman who shares the name and something of its associations with the past. She is perhaps 5 years younger than he is, a widow whose husband had been a schoolteacher, and she maintains the library with the careful attention of someone who understands that books are means of access to worlds beyond the small town. She is present in the bookshop of the newspaper office one afternoon when Armand is working on a small commission, and they fall into conversation about a volume of philosophy that is displayed on a shelf. The friendship that develops between them is slow and undefined. They encounter one another with increasing frequency at the cafe, at the market, at the library. They discuss books and ideas, and slowly these discussions expand to include observations about their respective lives. Armand mentions Paris and his work there, though he does not detail the investigation or the danger. Marguerite speaks of her husband's death, of her adjustment to solitude, of her satisfaction in maintaining the library, and in the small ways it serves the community. They begin to take evening walks together through the town, conversations that continue into the deepening twilight. There is no rushing, no dramatic declarations, merely an accumulation of shared moments that acquire meaning through their accumulation. Armand does not know if this will become what might be called romance, or if it will remain what it currently is, a close friendship between two people who have experienced loss and who recognize in one another a similar approach to bearing that loss with quiet dignity. He does not press the question. He allows the relationship to unfold at its own pace, aware that after the intensity and danger of the investigation years, the absence of pressure and urgency is itself valuable. Marguerite seems to approach their relationship similarly, content with companionship, not requiring that it be transformed into something larger. The newspaper continues its work, covering local events with careful attention. One investigation unfolds regarding the misuse of town funds by the current mayor, and Armand finds himself setting type for articles that describe the investigation with the same precision he once applied to Duval's work. Yet, the investigation proceeds through ordinary channels, without danger, with the expectation that accountability will follow from exposure. The mayor eventually resigns, a successor is appointed, and the cycle continues. It is modest, lacking drama. Yet it reinforces something that Armand has come to understand, that ordinary people attending to ordinary work with integrity can create conditions in which corruption becomes at least somewhat more difficult, in which truth, at least, has some possibility of prevailing. A letter arrives from Simone bearing news that requires Armand to sit alone for several hours after reading it. Another journalist has taken up the work that Duval had been pursuing, has begun investigating new networks of corruption that extend beyond the scope of the previous investigation. The work continues. The effort to expose wrongdoing, to create accountability, to insist that truth matters, these efforts persist in the hands of others, in the ongoing work of people who have recognized that their responsibility extends beyond their individual survival or comfort. Simone writes that she is participating in this new investigation, that the work remains dangerous, but that abandoning it would feel like a betrayal of what Duval had begun, of what they had accomplished together. Armand reads this information without the anxiety it would have provoked years before. He recognizes that the work continues, that his withdrawal from it does not constitute abandonment, but rather a recognition that the work requires many people, and that not all of those people can continue indefinitely. His role has concluded. Others will take up the work. The cycle will continue as long as people are willing to notice injustice and insist on accountability. His task now is different: to maintain his own integrity in smaller ways, to train younger people in the value of precision and honesty, to contribute to a community through work that is reliable and truthful. He responds to Simone's letter with a long account of his life in Saint-Denis-sur-Loire, describing the town, the work, the quiet he has found, and his recognition that this quiet is not a rejection of the work they did together, but rather a different form of participation in the same ongoing effort toward a world in which truth and integrity are possible. He tells her that he thinks of her regularly, that he is proud of the work she continues, that he believes her presence in Paris and her continued investigation serves purposes that extend beyond what any individual person can accomplish. He does not suggest returning. He does not propose that they meet. Instead, he writes with the tone of someone who has learned to love at a distance, who recognizes that their lives have taken different paths, but that these paths are not contradictory, but complementary. On an afternoon in late spring, Armand sets type for the weekly edition of the newspaper. The articles concern local events, the completion of repairs to the church roof, the announcement of a market day, a notice from the schoolmaster regarding the autumn term. The work is routine, requiring his attention, but not his intensity, allowing his mind to wander while his hands perform their practiced movements. As he works, he becomes aware that he is at peace in a way that would have been incomprehensible to him during the investigation years. The precision he applies to setting type now serves not a desperate struggle against corruption, but simply the reliable delivery of information to a community that depends on it. He pauses in his work to observe Pierre, the young apprentice, setting type for a small notice. The boy is concentrating with the absorbed focus of someone learning to understand his craft as something meaningful, rather than merely mechanical. Armand watches and recognizes that the knowledge he carries about precision, about the power of words rendered into type, about the responsibility that comes from working with language and truth, this knowledge is being transferred to the next person, who will carry it forward and pass it to others beyond him. The cycle continues. The work endures. As evening approaches and the newspaper is prepared for printing, Armand stands in the quiet shop, surrounded by the tools of his trade. The presses are ready for tomorrow's work. The type is arranged and waiting. The space smells of ink and paper and the particular quality of labor conducted with care. He thinks of Claude, lost to flames, designed to silence investigation. He thinks of Duval, eliminated for pursuing truth. He thinks of Simone, continuing work that he can no longer participate in directly. He thinks of the years in Paris, the danger and intensity, and the recognition that truth matters enough to risk everything for. Yet he also thinks of Pierre and the other young compositors, learning that precision is not merely technical achievement, but an act of respect for the world and the people who inhabit it. He thinks of Marguerite, who tends books as carefully as he tends type, believing that knowledge and information matter. He thinks of this small town, where corruption exists, but is constrained by visibility and community attention, where work that is honest is possible. And he understands, finally, that this is not escape from the larger struggle, but rather a different form of participation in it, that by maintaining integrity in small work, by passing on to younger people the value of precision and honesty, by serving a community with reliability and care, he is contributing to the same ongoing effort toward a world in which truth has a chance to prevail. The light fades outside the newspaper office windows. Armand extinguishes the lamps and climbs the stairs to his room above the shop. Tomorrow he will work again, setting type for words that matter to people in this town. The work will continue. The craft will endure. And somewhere in Paris and elsewhere, others will continue the work of investigating corruption, demanding accountability, insisting that truth matters. The effort is distributed across many people, across many forms of work, across many years. No single person accomplishes it. Yet all of it matters. All of it contributes to the possibility that the world might be somewhat less corrupt, somewhat more honest, somewhat more aligned with what should be true. He settles into the quiet of his room and into the knowledge that this quiet, earned through long struggle and hard choice, is genuine and will endure. The future remains uncertain, as the future always remains uncertain. Yet for the first time in many years, He feels no need to do anything, except be present to whatever comes, to his work, to the community, to the gradual unfolding of days that are filled not with danger, but with the ordinary satisfactions of labor conducted with care and integrity. And in this acceptance of the present moment, in this willingness to find meaning in the reliable work of his hands, and the knowledge that this work contributes in its own way to the larger effort of human beings struggling toward truthfulness and justice, he finds something that approaches peace. And in the context of a life that has known so much struggle, peace itself becomes a form of grace.